If we have to place faith in something in order to make decisions, how do we know if we're placing our faith in the right things? And so in doing this and evaluating our faith choices, there are a number of questions we need to ask. I just want us to discuss 2 questions. So the first question is whether the faith that we are holding is consistent with science. It's question number 1. The second question that we need to ask is whether that faith is also universally effective. And we're going to discuss both of those questions. We'll take them in turn. And I'll lay my cards on the table and say that as a scientist and a Christian, I'm going to pay special attention to the faith system of Christianity and evaluating its suitability by those criteria. But I would argue that any faith tradition, any faith framework needs to be subjected to this kind of scrutiny. So first, we have to look at a given framework of faith and decide if it is consistent with science. So here we're acknowledging that while science by itself isn't enough on its own, still science isn't nothing. It's still a very important component of human thought. And so a faith principle that runs counter to science should really be viewed with fairly hefty skepticism. And there's actually a fairly general misconception that Christianity actually fails on this point. That Christianity is, in and of itself, at its roots, inconsistent with science. So to put it one way, there's a myth that believing in Christianity means you can't believe in fill in the blank with your favorite controversial topic. You can't believe in the Big Bang or evolution or climate change, whatever you want to say. And the general idea seems to be that there are observable facts that Christians are supposed to stand for. How old is the universe? What are the origins of species? Does the earth revolve around the sun or the sun around the earth? And the proposition, or the perception, is that the difference between science and Christianity is just which description of events you think is correct. Scientists think the earth is this many years old, Christians think it's this many years old. Scientists believe in trilobites, Christians don't believe in trilobites. Scientists drink Coke, Christians drink Pepsi. And I want to emphasize from the outset that this is a myth. It's false. Christianity is not at all incompatible with science. And the mistake here is equating both Christianity and science with a set of observable facts. This is not an accurate characterization of either Christianity or science. Now, some of you might disagree with me. Some of you might say, well, isn't science just factual observations? Things like there are 206 bones in the human body, or sodium reacts vigorously with water. Isn't that what science is? And I have to admit that it's a failing of our scientific education system that you have probably spent a lot of time in your science classes memorizing facts exactly like that. But unfortunately, those facts by themselves are not science. As Henri Poincaré said, science is made up of facts. Just as houses are made of stones, science is made of facts. But a pile of stones is not a house, and a collection of facts is not necessarily science. Because science is more than just a catalog of observations about the physical world. Science is a framework for taking those observations and shaping them and giving them a kind of meaning. Likewise, Christianity is more than just observable facts. Christians, by and large, believe the Bible is true, and the Bible does contain a number of facts about God's action in the natural world. But these facts by themselves are not Christianity. Christianity is a framework for taking those facts and giving them meaning and purpose. Now, what is certainly true is that the interpretations offered by science and the scientists and the interpretations offered by Christians are often in conflict, but this shouldn't really shock us, because at the same time, the interpretations offered by one scientist are also in conflict with the interpretations offered by other scientists. These conflicts are not a sign of some kind of fundamental incompatibility. Rather, these conflicts are the way that we learn things. And so don't let anyone fool you into thinking that science and religious faith are somehow incompatible. So that was the first question. Is whatever faith framework you're working with compatible with scientific thought? The second question is whether, and that one wasn't very useful in terms of narrowing things down, because as we've now established, There are actually a lot of different faith frameworks that you could use that would be consistent with science. So the second question is the one that's more significant. We need a framework that's going to be effective. It has to work. It has to work for us. And what is more, if I'm going to say that some framework is enough, then I need something that's going to work all the time. A faith that only works part of the time is, by definition, incomplete. So it needs to be universally effective all the time. And what the Christian faith recognizes is that for something to be universally effective, what matters to humans in the face of incomplete information is the thing that matters very much is who is making a request of us. This is not true in the case of science. The source of the request doesn't matter. It only matters what is written in the paper. It doesn't matter who wrote it. But in the case of action decisions, the source is always critical. So if my wife texted me and told me to leave $100 in our mailbox, I would do it without requiring further information. But if one of you texted me and told me to leave $100 in my mailbox, I would call the authorities. Because it matters who is asking. And this is why impersonal ideals are generally insufficient as a framework of faith. They are simply not effective. So, for example, suppose reason is my ideal. The one thing I try to use to guide all of my actions. That's right, I'm asking you to suppose that I am Mr. Spock. So Mr. Spock, if you recall, I don't know if anybody didn't watch Star Trek in the room, but he was a character on Star Trek, and he tried to base every single decision he made on reason and logic alone. And it was comically ineffective. Because every episode along came James Tiberius Kirk, and he would ask Spock to do something that didn't make sense. And every episode, Spock caved. He did whatever Kirk asked him because Kirk was his best friend. And all of us watching the show knew that Spock, when he caved, was making the right decision because his noble ideal, by abandoning this noble ideal and just doing what his friend asked, because we recognized that the ideal simply wasn't effective at governing some of his decisions. And so what Christianity realizes is that in order for our faith to be universally effective, there needs to be a person behind all of it. A person that motivates our study of the natural world and guides our responsible conduct. And in Christianity, that person is Jesus. As Christians, we are convinced that when we put our faith in Jesus, then the person of Christ who was raised from the dead comes to live in us. And fundamentally, what I believe as a Christian is in the power of that person to change me, to change who I am. That is what makes Christianity effective. And this change is very important to me because I have noticed a flaw in my character. So I have a lot of moral maxims that I think are true. Things like turn the other cheek, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, tell the truth. And I am constantly disappointed by my inability to live up to those high principles. So take, for example, prayer. I think prayer is very, very important. Email, on the other hand, I do not think is very, very important. But if you asked me how many times a day I check my email versus how many times a day I pray, I would not answer your question. Because I would be embarrassed by the answer. And this has been a problem for me for a long, long time. You see, when I was in junior high and high school, I was a geek. Now, I know it's shocking. You are probably thinking, you are a quantum chemistry professor at MIT, and you were a geek in high school? Shut the front door. It's hard to believe, but it is true. I was too smart for my own good, I was socially awkward, I was unathletic, and to boot, I grew too quickly, so you could count on it that 6 months out of the year, my clothes were too small. And the unfortunate reality is that chicks don't dig tall, scrawny, awkward dudes who don't know how to dress themselves. So in the social structure of my high school, there were the popular kids, and then there were kids like me. And I was one of those unpopular kids who desperately wanted to be cool. I thought if I could just get into the in crowd, then I would be content. And it didn't make me a very nice person. I shunned the people who I thought were lower on the social ladder than I was, all the other people who didn't have the money to wear the right kind of clothes, or all the other members of my chemistry Olympiad team who, in my defense, were far nerdier than I was. And life outside of high school didn't really turn out all that differently for me. As time went on, I simply found myself replacing popularity with any of a host of other ultimate goals: good grades, success in my career, wealth, fame. And I knew that none of them was likely to make me a good person. I even suspected that none of them was really going to make me a happy person. But I wanted them just the same. Because the problem isn't with high school or the in crowd or academia. The problem is me, the things that I want. And no matter how hard I work, that's never a problem I'm going to solve, because I am the problem. And science doesn't really help me with this. And even theistic naturalism doesn't provide me any aid. Because if God just set the universe in motion and then hung out a sign that says, "Be back in 25 billion years," then I'm stuck. Whatever I am is whatever I am. And most religions are even less help on this point, because they tie our acceptance by God to our ability to live by a certain set of rules or accomplish a certain set of tasks. Only in Christianity does God provide the means to change who we are. In Christianity, you don't do good as a way of sucking up to God and proving how much better you are than all the non-Christians out there. In fact, it's not as if morality in Christianity is a ladder that we have to ascend to get to God. In fact, the whole narrative in Christianity isn't about people ascending to draw close to God. The narrative of Christianity is about God drawing near to us. In Christianity, the same God who set the universe in motion, the same God who works in and through the natural laws, the same God who set up the principles of ethics, that same God provided the means, the bridge, in the person of Jesus.